Did you know that, according to Harvard Health, 90% of video games rated appropriate for children that are 10 or younger by the ESRB contain some sort of violent content? While it is believed that the content of these games can influence children and young adults to act out and become more violent, is there any sufficient evidence to prove this link? As an avid video game player for many years, I know that some of the content featured in these games may be concerning to those who believe that media has an effect on how we think and act. As millions of people play video games each day, it is important to understand whether or not they impact the mentality of people and if it can lead to violent events. Thankfully, there is no evidence to suggest that violent video games are responsible for making people more violent or cause people to act aggressively. In this speech, I will delve into how video games don't cause violence based on credible statistics and studies, the fact that research against video games is faulty, and that video games benefit people rather than cause violence in them. Studies and statistics show that video games don't relate to real-world violence. Statistics show that violent video games and violence have no cause or effect relationship. According to the Reno Gazette, the Department of Justice statistics show that since 1993, juvenile murder arrests decreased by 71%, while video game sales continue to rapidly increase. According to Procon.org, a study of the countries representing the 10 largest video game markets internationally found no correlation between playing video games and gun-related killings. Despite the high level of gun violence in the United States, the other countries have low violent crime rates. Procon.org also claims that a report by the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education that examined 37 incidents of targeted school violence between 1974 and 2000 found that of the 41 attackers studied, only 12% showed interest in violent video games. The overall report did not find a relationship between playing violent video games and school shootings. Investigations and tests show that there is no correlation between violent actions and violent video game playing. A study by Craig Ferguson of the Texas A&M Department of Behavioral, Applied Sciences, and Criminal Justice had 103 young adults who were given a frustration task and then randomized to not play a game, play a non-violent game, play a violent game as a good guy, and play a violent game as the bad guy. The results indicated that randomized video game play had no effect on aggressive behavior, according to the Reno Gazette. Harvard Health states that Dr. Patrick Markey of Villanova University and Dr. Charlotte Markey of Rutgers University has presented evidence that most children who play violent video games don't experience increases in aggression, apart from a few exceptions. They concluded that the combination of the three personality traits of high neuroticism, disagreeableness, and low levels of conscientiousness are more likely to make players of violent video games more aggressive. For my next point, I will show how research that focuses on how video games can cause violence is often inaccurate. Research that claims violent video games have a negative impact on people are flawed. This research often tests for aggression and attempts to correlate it to real-world violence. According to Harvard Health, in a 2010 report published by the American Psychology Association, Dr. Christopher Ferguson argues that many studies that relate to the issue of media violence rely on measures to assess aggression that don't correlate to real-world violence. Procon.org states that a peer-reviewed study in psychology of violence determined that the competitive nature of a video game was related to aggressive behavior, regardless of whether the game contained violent content. The researchers concluded because past studies have failed to equate the violent and non-violent games on competitiveness, difficulty, and pace of the action simultaneously, researchers may have attributed too much of the variability and aggression to the violent content. The evidence faced is based on correlation rather than causation. As stated by Christopher Ferguson in the Psych 101 series, Media Psychology 101, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that these studies do not prove that violent video games cause minors to act aggressively. Nearly all of the research is based on correlation, not evidence of causation. Multiple scholars acknowledge that most of the research is inconclusive and faulty. According to the Reno Gazette, Lawrence Kuttner and Cheryl K. Olson, who are co-founders of the Harvard Medical School Center for Mental Health and Media, wrote, "The strong link between video games violence and the real-world violence, and the conclusion that video games lead to social isolation and poor interpersonal skills are drawn from bad or irrelevant research, muddle-headed thinking, and unfounded simplistic news reports." Christopher Ferguson in the Psych 101 series, Media Psychology 101, states that early video game research that included games like Pac-Man and Mortal Kombat was inconsistent and acknowledged so by multiple researchers. While the research that tries to prove a relationship between video games and violence are unreliable, there is evidence that video games have a number of benefits to those that play them. Violent video games have a positive effect on people. Video games can be a form of normal development for children. Harvard Health states that studies found that most young respondents described the games as fun, exciting, something to counter boredom, and something to do with friends. Boys in particular are motivated to play video games in order to compete and win. Seen in this context, use of violent video games may be similar to the type of roughhousing play that boys engage in as part of normal development. Video games can help with issues involving negative emotions. The Reno Gazette claims that video games can be a factor that helps people reduce depression and hostile feelings. In a study conducted by Craig Ferguson, mentioned earlier, results show that violent video game playing was predictive of decreased depression and aggressive emotions through mood management. According to Procon.org, a study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that 61.9% of boys played video games to relax, 47.8% played to help them forget their problems, and 45.4% played games to help release their anger. Playing video games have helped me deal with negative emotions by allowing me to relax, relieve stress, and help me work through my anger. Games can improve social skills and encourage cooperation with others. Julie Jargon in the Wall Street Journal claims that, but what about the social, cooperative nature of many games? The human brain is capable of learning a lot of things at once, Dr. Gentile said. If this game has aggressive elements, you'll learn those, and if you're practicing cooperation, you'll learn that too. Video games have allowed me to improve my social skills, allowed me to communicate with others, and improve my cooperation skills and teamwork abilities. In closing, there is no reason to believe that video games that include violent content can lead to violent actions in people. Due to the statistics and studies, the lack of credible counter-research, and the positive aspects that games have on people, you can see why violent video games should not be blamed for violence in today's world. Hopefully my speech has convinced you that the video games and violence have no correlation, and that instead of viewing them in a negative light, you will hopefully see that the advantages that they can provide.